my name is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 32 of The Grief of Politics. I'm joined once again by Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing?
Doing good. Good morning, Joe.
Good, good, good. I have like two monitors. I'm looking at a bunch of stuff, so my eyeline's probably all over the place. But yeah, I guess this week we were going to talk about the Trump indictment because there's another one. This is the fourth one, correct?
Well, we weren't originally going to talk about that.
Right,
We were going to talk about Supreme Court.
Yes, but the deal is, the fourth indictment got handed down, and two, you and I always try to talk about the grief of politics, how it affects people, and I was really thinking about it when I sent you the articles over, and I found a lot of articles about the grief of all of this, about, people being threatened, and some really terrible things being said, someone being brought into custody because of the words of Donald J. Trump. The things he's been saying on social media and stuff like that. People, I take it, his supporters, I wouldn't imagine it would be somebody, have taken it upon themselves to call judges. We'll get into that and stuff like that. And anyway, was it weird for me to send you these articles and stuff? Because we talked about it on the phone, I know, last night. Yeah, let's talk about the Trump indictment. And as I was going through the articles, I was like, are we just going to regurgitate kind of what other news organizations done? And I didn't really want to do that. And I mean, with the thesis of our whole podcast of being the grief of politics, it didn't really seem to encapsulate, kind of what it was.
I mean, I don't think it was weird. One, like we talked about it last night,
Yeah.
and you kind of voiced your I really want to focus on the grief aspect of it, which I think is appropriate for our show, the grief of politics, and around this, around Donald Trump, there just is a lot of grief, for better or worse,
Right.
on both ends of the political spectrum. And if you're a pro-Trump person, I think you can recognize there's a lot of grief in the never Trump side of the political spectrum.
Or
So appropriate that we address it.
what's the other word? The rhinos. That I've been heard people being called rhinos because if they, in fact,
Republican in name only.
right, but I know what it means, which, yeah, if you didn't know, you know now. But the idea that if all of a sudden you start voicing opposition to Trump, he is called people rhinos. And then it seems like other people in his camp have said that about conservatives or Republicans now, that are like, hey, let's take a step back and not really maybe put all of our eggs in the Trump basket. And now, supporters will call them rhinos.
I mean, I read a pretty scathing article in Wall Street Journal this week that basically put forward that Donald Trump can't win, and almost any other candidate who is reasonably composed that is running on a platform of policies and strategies on how to govern the country can beat Joe Biden. Because just things are going so poorly, even among the Democrats being polled, they're very unhappy with Joe Biden. And so the Democratic Party really actually does want Donald Trump to be the nominee, because basically he can't win. Independents will not vote for him. And so all he's going to get is his base, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's his problem. I think I just read a poll this morning basically backing up what you just said, that since everything is shrinking, his base among his supporters, they're totally bought in. They want to vote for him. But as you get to a general electorate, it swaps, where the more this information comes out about these indictments. I mean, to talk about the indictment very quickly, I just got an NBC News article. Trump and 18 co-defendants were charged with racketeering in Georgia. There was, I want to say, a 95-page indictment that I read. There was 41 counts. The 41-count indictment, and the indictment itself was 95 pages. And many that have always been in Trump's orbit, Rudy Giuliani, the Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Ray Smith, basically got brought up on racketeering charges, RICO charges. And I don't know if you say Fannie or Fana Willis. People have been pronouncing her name differently in the press, but she's the DA in Georgia. So that's just to go over that. But what I found after I was reading all this, it would link to other articles about when people were being threatened by Trump. And although we've talked about it a little in the past, these are new things. Like one of these articles came out August 18th. Another one came out.
So I will pause you a little bit there because you're saying they're being threatened. You flat out said they're being threatened by Trump. You even paused on those two words, and that's not true.
No,
and I know you know better. Yeah. So I just wanted to correct that.
No, it seems to be his supporters because I don't think, like you being conservative, I don't think you would. If you disagree with something, you're not going to call and threaten someone's life. It's going to be people that are right.
I'm glad you know that about me. Thank you, Joe.
Well, they did say that too about if you we'll read the quote, but one of the quotes that they left a phone message was, if you do this move against Trump, we will get. So it's like, oh, obviously you're a supporter of Trump.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but I also, this thing in Georgia, which I thought was interesting, was they publicly released the names of the they unredact the names of the grand jury. I'm just going to read from this article really quick. It was GPB News?
Georgia Public Broadcasting, GPB.
Okay. Yeah. So authorities investigated threats to grand jurors who indicted Trump in Georgia. This came out, like we said, August 18th. And they kind of go through, this is like middle of the article. It says, though the grand jury proceedings were secret, the unredacted names of the grand jury members were included in the indictment. That's standing practice in Georgia, in part because it gives criminal defendants a chance to challenge the composition of the grand jury. The indictment itself is a public record. That's interesting. So they could, the defendants could go back and go, well, you only have, these are all people from this district, or, maybe it's a race thing of like, we're in a district with 80% black people, and you have nothing but white people. Whatever the makeup is, they could challenge the makeup of the jury. And correct. I think that's interesting. But in this case, people, since their names are all public, they have one. Oh, they said authorities in Georgia said Thursday they're investigating threats targeting members of the grand jury that indicted former President Donald Trump and 18 of his allies. Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt's office said investigators are working to trace the origins of the threats after the names of grand jury members and other personal information were posted online. The sheriff's office said other local, state, and law enforcement agencies were assisting. Quote, we take this matter very seriously and are coordinating with our law enforcement partners to respond quickly to any credible threat and to ensure the safety of those individuals who carried out their civic duty, unquote, the sheriff's office said in a statement. Yeah. And then even the American Bar Association condemned any threats as well as sharing other personal information. So it sounds like not just their names were online, but like the court document probably wouldn't have their addresses, but that probably got dug up or people were able to get a hold of them.
It's not hard to dig it up, right? Yeah. Like doxing is a thing.
Yeah.
And so people know how to do it, find names, look up records. Like I could do it pretty easily. You could do it pretty easily. It's not difficult.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of just a broad thing, but we'll read an article later where it was specific towards a particular judge in another case. And so this kind of lays the groundwork. And we've talked about it before in there was an episode, I think, around not January 6th, but there was the FBI buildings were, I think it was the Mar-a-Lago thing we talked about where after the Mar-a-Lago indictment weren't some like FBI agents, like somebody jumped a barricaded an FBI office or something and attacked an FBI officer. And then in Arizona, there was something happen. I think it was right around the Mar-a-Lago thing we did. There was like another something.
I remember reading about it, but I don't remember the specifics. But again, I shouldn't say again, but with that, I'm not surprised. People are very, very committed to their belief that Donald Trump won the 2020 election to the point where they're zealous, bordering on religion in their commitment to the ideal. And it's scary because it's politics and it's politicians. Yeah. And we're worshiping the celebrity of Donald Trump. We're witnessing the worship of the celebrity of Donald Trump to the point where people are willing to do pretty off the wall things that they never probably would have thought they could have done before.
Yeah, actually, there was a book. I believe his name's Steve Batten. He that I read. He was in a cult, got deprogrammed, then went to school to study psychology, and then went out and deprogrammed people. And he wrote a book about it. And I think the book is called The Cult of Trump. And I actually want to read it because he spent time dealing with this kind of stuff, you know, and I want to read his perspective on, yeah, this is bad. But that just got my feed because I was looking up some of these articles and stuff. The other one was actually kind of like in our backyard, quote unquote, in Oregon, where this is from NPR. For election workers, Trump's lies have meant threats, harassment, and a poisoned dog, which I was like, what? So basically, it just starts out by saying that a county election worker was crossing the street with a locked bag full of ballots. When he saw a Jeep Gladiator pickup truck come around the corner, it sped toward him and slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop just past him. The driver glared. Then she leaned out of the car and looked at me and yelled, "You effing traitor." The woman had been followed him all day as he drove around collecting ballots from drop boxes in, is that Coos County, Oregon? The man, whom we agreed not to identify because he didn't want to be targeted, said that she would get out and film him and that he had to have a gun. Oh, and that she had a gun on her hip. So this is getting even more like aggressive. And then they said that it's the office where these people work. Officials set up metal detectors at the entrance of to the Capitol building, I think. And over about a month, a security guard stopped people from bringing in a total of 20 guns and 60 knives or other weapons. The worker collected ballots, called 911 4 times the day. He says he was menaced by the woman in the Jeep. I have to have somebody following me. So I was terrified. I was worried that I might not make it off the road. And this says their stories show that more than 2 years after the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, not only is Trump's lies that he won the election alive and well in a large chunk of the Republican Party, but the misinformation about voter fraud is endangering the people whose job it is to conduct elections. I actually bring a weapon with me every day to work, says Nancy Boren, the director of elections in Columbus, Georgia. We also have security here in the building who, it sounds even crazy to say this, but walks me to and from my car. So this is worse. And the next article is worse. So what do you, like reading this, you read these this morning, it is troubling, but to me, it goes past free speech. Like, again, that's one of the things that the prosecutors are talking about in Georgia and with the Jack Smith indictment of the fake electors of, like, again, Trump has the right to voice his, the election was stolen, it was rigged. He has the right to say that. He does not have the right to hire fake electors or, like I've heard a lot of people talking about this saying, you have the right to buy a gun. You don't have the right to say, hey, let's tell your friend, let's go buy a gun and rob a bank. Like that shows provocation or whatever, And so when Trump says these, when people are maybe just saying that these people are voicing their First Amendment rights, doesn't seem to be true when you call an election worker or follow an election worker while they're doing their job of collecting ballots.
I mean, you can get even simpler than that too, right? Like the First Amendment protects free speech as long as it's not harmful. And I'm shortening all of the caveats to harmful because there's several and I don't remember their exact wording.
Right.
But basically, like you can't incite violence, you can't, run up a mob and a riot, cause riots, that kind of stuff. Like that is illegal. But it's very difficult to prove. And the equivalent to that would be like free speech is protected, but you can't stand up in the movie theater and yell fire.
Right. Because that could put people in danger, right? If people
correct.
Or whatever.
And that's extremely difficult to prove. So in the January 6th indictment from Jack Smith, proving that's going to be kind of difficult. but there's a ton of people that are out there, right? There's the grief aspect of it, of people being harassed and threatened, not being able to do their work based on the election lie rhetoric, right? Like, there's all the grief that's surrounding that side of it for the conservatives, right? Like, I voted and you didn't hear my vote. You manipulated the numbers. You rigged the election. And we, the American people, were robbed, and our country is worse because of it. And right, like, the democratic process, I would like to say, so I was about to say, is very, very important to the American people. And I thought about it for a second and was like, oh man, the last election actually had a huge voter turnout by standards in the United States, and it was still like 60% of eligible voters or something. Like, it was.
I mean, you take what you can get, but yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, it should be more important. To go on a slight tangent, I think we should make it a holiday, just so people have time, because you always hear these stories of people waiting in line for 2 hours to vote. And so it's like, hey, it maybe doesn't make that 2 hours any better, but you have the time to,
I agree with you on that, but I think the reason it hasn't happened is because it's beneficial to politicians on both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
If you make voting difficult, be it Democrat or Republican, depending on where you are, politicians want it to be harder for people to get out. They want, and I don't agree with that philosophy. Like, universally, should just make it like it's a national holiday. Election day is a national holiday. Period. Or it's mandatory 2 hour time break or whatever, but lines get long in some areas, and so 2 hours may not be enough. So probably just make it in a holiday is probably the right way to do it. Make it easier for people to vote in person. Mm-hmm. If you're worried that mail-in voting is too easy to manipulate, then fine. Make it easier for people to vote in person.
Or like, there's a lot of tales with all this going on about how many, like you said, voting stations are in different states or counties. And you hear stories all the time of like, well, there isn't one in my county, so I did have to drive an hour to this other county somewhere and then wait in line for 2 hours because people in different areas are experiencing the same thing where they're driving. And it's like, create a polling station somewhere,
And, right, like, you and I live in a state that's been mail-in balloting for years, and it's been hailed as one of the best systems. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine a while ago, and he was talking about, mail-in ballots are way too easy to manipulate. It's way too easy to rig the elections with mail-in ballots. And I was like, man, you live in Washington State. Like, we've been doing it for 15 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's awful. And I'm like, it was set up by a Republican Secretary of State and has been watched over by a Republican Secretary of State who has managed to hold that seat for like 15 years. And the only reason she left is because she was pulled in by the Biden administration.
Oh, to do it nationally?
To help. Right.
To run it nationally. That I didn't know.
So, like, she's done such a good job that the opposite party was like, hey, you've done really good with keeping elections safe and secure in your state. Like, we want you to come along, too.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
No.
Like, we live in a country where if you're Republican, to the Democrats, you're the devil. You are evil incarnate because you have an R next to your name.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the Democratic Party was like, hey, you've done a really good job, and we want to have trust on this, so we're going to grab you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
And she had a super high level of integrity that they were willing to do that, right? So it really bothers me when people are questioning that part of it, because I'm like, no, like, you can. A lot of states haven't had a lot of time to set up mail-in balloting correctly, and the last election was still when we were pretty restricted because of COVID and getting people out, so states were pivoting to vote by mail, and like, I could see maybe there's a higher instance of fraud, but every single time, every single lawsuit the Trump administration and his lawyers brought forth, they were dismissed outright. They didn't even go to court, and many of those were by judges he appointed.
Yeah.
I haven't read the lawsuits, but I was reading that.
It was over 50. I read that before in researching this episode. I think it was over 50 lawsuits, at least, that they sent to the...
In one of our articles here, actually, the one that's talking about Coos Bay, they specifically talk about how many lawsuits were brought forward and how many of them were shot down.
Okay.
And I just... I look at that and I'm like, man, I kind of want to read those lawsuits and see what this evidence actually was, because no one's ever told me what the evidence is. Everyone I talk to that is conservative, when I ask what is the actual evidence, I'll just say, well, they manipulated the voting machines. Well, they changed the votes for mail-in ballots. I'm like, where's the evidence? Like, I want to actually see the evidence. Show me, because none of it stood up to rigor in court. I want to see what these charges actually are. Because if it's more than 5, 6, 7 votes, like, if I remember correctly, as we're going through the process, people came out and were like, yeah, we did find some fraudulent votes, but there was like a dozen.
Yeah. Or like one state I think was bad where it was like 100 or something. Like, it was so sporadic throughout the country. And that always happens, like there's always, you can never have something.
There always has been and always will be voter fraud. But the allegation from the Trump team has always been that it's, tens of thousands of votes and, they swung the numbers and this is a complete fraud. And how come the numbers come in hot right at the very last second, right? Like, it's not possible. I'm like, well, it's 100% possible. Like, a lot of people wait to the last second to vote because they really want to see what the parties and people are going to do. So all of that to say, right, like the argument's super flimsy to me. I haven't seen anything that makes me feel that way other than Trump and his people standing up saying, well, it was stolen. And to me, I say you have an ulterior motive for that to be true. And so you have to prove it to me.
Well, for a long time, like Sidney Powell started with her thing about the Kraken. We're going to bring the Kraken. We're going to show everybody the evidence. That never materialized, I
mean, this week alone, Donald Trump in Georgia was going to have his press conference and then backed off of it because he had irrefutable evidence. And his attorneys pleaded with him to not do it, is the whole story. And I'm like, if his attorneys are pleading with him to not do it and his evidence is irrefutable, they would be like, yeah, get out there, go do it.
Yeah, we want to
stand in front of everyone and show the whole world, because there's no way that they will bring these charges forward if you actually have irrefutable evidence. Which tells me his own attorneys don't believe it, and they need to do some, legal jockeying in the courtroom to try to protect it.
Well, I think we both watch Breaking Points or listen to Breaking Points, and one of the things they brought up is that Trump knows he can't really win. Both Crystal and Saga brought it up about, like, they don't think Trump can win in a court of law, so he's trying to win in a court of public opinion politics type way. The idea that, and I will say that is important, but at the end of the day, for him it's very important. But I think at the end of the day, for me, that ultimately doesn't matter, because if you're found guilty and you go to jail, like, to me, that is more powerful than you being, like, winning the, and I think it will be a thing. And like, we talked about this on the phone, but I mean, if you want to talk about it, like, you consider yourself obviously more conservative, libertarian, whatever. And you talk to people in your groups, and you even said you're getting kind of frustrated with this whole narrative of, like, guys, come on, like, what's going on? And I can't imagine. I mean, obviously I'm looking at it from the outside saying none of this holds water. But
I want to actually see the evidence. I want to understand it better, because I don't. I've never liked Donald Trump. I was not happy that he won. I do think good things happen in his administration, right? Like, one of the strongest economies we've ever had. I think all the rhetoric about him being racist is completely off base. Like, it's just the left slams anyone they disagree with as racist. Trump has some history of saying some things that are racist, but also he has a long-standing history of being friends with and supporting people of various ethnicities. Like, their rapists thing was like specifically to people that were coming into the country illegally. He wasn't saying every single Mexican is a rapist, but he was saying that they can come across the borders. Like, the conflating of his words to attack him is extremely frustrating.
Well, I mean, to be honest, him and his father were found guilty of kicking minorities out of their buildings when they controlled buildings in New York. That was an actual court case when the judge found them. So he does have some history of doing racist things. I can't see into his soul to know if he's an out-and-out racist, or he's just one of those old school people that we all have in our lives that will say something at a dinner and you're like, what the?
I mean, he's 77 years old, right? Like, that's going to happen. I personally don't believe that narrative, and it's a weapon that's wielded by the left so heavily and so broadly that it carries almost no weight to me, unless you can be like, here, look, he called a black person the N-word and meant it with malice.
I don't think... Well, I mean, there is that court case, obviously, when him and his father got caught like booting minorities out of their buildings. So that's
And how long ago was that?
Oh, probably the 80s, the early 80s. So
Right.
I mean, but still, I don't think,
And Trump really, really cared what his father thought about him.
Right.
So I 100% would see him doing that to make his dad happy.
Well, there's also
because there's a lot of evidence of him being friends with African American workers in his hotels and supporting them. There's a lot of evidence of him being around Hispanic people without malice.
Well, there's also reports of him like not paying people, and that's just general construction.
I
And
mean,
stuff like that. And
across the board, there's reports of him not paying people, and I think the evidence is actually quite strong, right? Yeah. So, like I said, I don't like him. I didn't want him to be president. I was disappointed that he was, but the point being is that good things did come out of his presidency, and in fact, the Biden administration took some Trump administration policies and continued to run with them. I read a whole article. It was a left-wing newspaper that was like, despite the fact that we're not happy about it, like these Biden administration is taking these policies, but they're doing it the right way.
Yeah,
Trump didn't do it the right way.
I've read those articles too. I'll just say that I think that, I don't think we have a net benefit. Although there were some good things, I don't think there's a net benefit. And again, to get to this last article, the
judge, right? Like
yeah.
The point I'm getting at is that there is a genuine level of grief on both ends of the argument for that, right? Like there's a massive amount of people that feel like they were robbed, that have so tied themselves to the identity of Trump that they need to stand up and protect and defend because it's their only hope as they see it for the future of the country. Like the only person who can do good in their eyes is Trump. He's sold the idea to this massive percentage of people because he was actually for better or worse, he's not afraid to say what's on his mind without a filter. Like he's not a polished politician. He's willing to just spew out whatever thought or idea comes forward. Unfortunately, it's generally driven by his narcissism, and so it will change based off of the breeze of what he thinks will make him more liked by his people. What's going to win him the most praise and
I think somebody said
ego?
that. I think somebody said that about him, that he's one of those people that's like the last guy in the room that gets his attention. That's his thing is like, and one thing I'll say is like, again, I don't like Trump either, but he's got so much charisma that he's like, hey, he'll come into a room and you're like, whoa, what's going on? You know what I mean? And like, hey.
He's suddenly the Fonz.
Yeah, he is. Well, sometimes he's got that much charisma, but I just think that like, that's why some of these people, like I want to read this last article, again by NPR.
That's why they're willing to do what happened in this article.
Yeah.
Right?
A Texas woman is charged with threatening the judge overseeing Trump's January 6th trial. This is
another NPR article published August 17th of this year, 23.
A Houston area woman was detained on Wednesday after charged with threatening the federal judge overseeing former President Donald Trump's election interference case. They published her name. Abigail Jo Schrei, 43, of Alvin, Texas, allegedly called the chambers for U.S. District Judge Chanya. I can never say her name. Chukun. Chukun. Anyway, the judge and left a voicemail on August 5th promising to kill anyone who went after former President Donald Trump, according to the affidavit. You are in our sights. We want to kill you, Schrei allegedly said. Trump doesn't get elected in 2024. We're coming to kill you, so tread lightly, B word. Unquote. You will be targeted personally, publicly, your family, all of it, the voicemail continued. The affidavit said Schrei used both the N-word and slave to address the judge, who was born in Jamaica. She also made a direct threat to kill. She also made, quote, made a direct threat to kill, unquote, to kill Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a Texas Democrat, as well as all Washington Democrats broadly and all members of the LGBTQ community, according to the Department of Homeland Security. So does she mean Washington, D.C. or our Washington? Was she just calling officials? Anyway, the agent said Schrei admitted to making the call when questioned, but said she had no plans to travel to D.C. or to Lee's office in Houston to carry out the threats. Schrei faces one count of communication containing a threatening or to injure the person of another, and was detained Wednesday after the order of a U.S. magistrate judge.
And right, like she's as she said, she had no intention of actually following through on it, but she still did it. And she should know that it's wrong. Like, it is against the law to do that, let alone to make those kinds of intimidations, right? Like, call your politicians and voice your opinions to them, right?
Did you hear
But
this happened on the other side of the aisle as well? Did you hear about there was a Biden? Well, it was somebody on Facebook threatened Biden. I think he was in Idaho or Utah, and he said, he said I got my guns and whatever, and nothing's really been released. But apparently the FBI went there and they shot and killed him.
yeah, I don't know the specifics of it. My suspicion is he's probably resisting arrest because he probably saw it as unjust and a criminal arrest.
Yeah,
because Biden's the actual criminal, and it's tragic, right? Like, people, Donald Trump is bordering on a religion, and like, it's scary because the man only cares about himself. Well, he only cares about himself.
So I have another question for you. If now that there is a special counsel in the Hunter Biden case, are your friends talking about that? And I
haven't had any conversations with anyone about that. I had an extremely busy work week this week, and so I have not really been talking to people about it. You and I have a mutual friend. I might, if I were you, I would recommend bringing it up with that person. But I think you guys have sworn off politics to maintain your friendship.
He did a little bit, but it was like in passing, and then it was, hey, I'm not going to get into that. And it's like, okay, I could, but if you don't want to. I'll say what I think is weird is, like you brought up before, it's like, why don't they go after them? It's like, well, they are. So now that they are going after Biden,
right?
What about?
No, and I appreciate that, right? Like, you know me. I think I said it before on the podcast. I said it many times before with all of my friends, and every single conservative person who listens to this podcast, every single conservative person that is a friend of mine. If you want to be righteous and demand that our president be held accountable, our current president, Joe Biden, and his son be held accountable for their corruption, you cannot expect that in good conscience if you do not expect the same from your own party.
Yeah.
Period. Full stop. There is no argument to it. You will never win my opinion on that because you cannot have the high ground if you do not clean your own house first.
Yeah, and
take the log from your own eye first.
I'm sorry, is that from the Bible? I don't
know. It
is. Okay.
Yes.
I know you know that. I did not. I'm like, that's wisdom, Avin. You're like, well, it's like really old. I just took it
from somewhere. Really old.
I took it from somewhere. I will say, though, it's one of those things where it's like, it's happening, guys. So, like, now we're there. Now there's a special counsel for both, And
yeah, and that is a great thing. Like, I've been hoping for this for a long time, right? Like, there was all that news. Though the Hunter Biden laptop, it's fake news. There's nothing there. You Republicans, you're clinging on to this thing. So, like, it's justifying. There's been so many instances over the last year. And I think this is part of the problem, too. There have been so many instances over the past 2 years, 3 years, where conservatives have been putting forth all these ideas that were just dismissed as conspiracy theories, and then they're like, oh, wait, actually, yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
And no one's coming out being like, we were totally wrong. We're sorry for demonizing you as conspiracy theorists. Like, it actually, we were lied to. We believed the lie. We didn't do our journalistic duty and dig into it. We're sorry. We will now.
Well,
no, I mean, none of that's happened.
Well, it's happened on the other side too with Trump, where like now it's like, hey, what about all these charges? And most of the conservatives are like, it's a free speech issue, and you're like, is it? Because I don't really think it is. Is it? Guys, come on, we're doing like
to do the Joe high pitch thing. Is it really?
Is it really? I don't think it is. I'll say this. I mean, how many times in this podcast have we talked about like nepotism? Like I don't know if Hunter did anything illegal. It's just tiring to hear about the son of a congressman or whatever, and then president obviously calling his dad going, hey, Dad, talk to everybody. Like, that is reprehensible. Is that illegal? I don't know. Maybe he got some cash payments. I've heard some mumblings of that. I don't know if that's true. We'll find out. But again, at the same thing, if you're going to put that scrutiny on Hunter Biden, you have to look at Trump and go, yeah, but a lot of these people that he's with know what he's doing is kind of wrong, and they're keeping logs. And some of those people have flipped because they're like, hey, man, I just like the Mar-a-Lago case. I work here, man. I don't want any involved with anything illegal.
You and I talked about it earlier this week. The whole Twitter thing with Trump's DMs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, that's...
I don't know what's in there, but I think we're all going to find out. I think it's going to be really damning.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Smith was like, I want these, and well, also, sorry, to take it back to the grief of politics, no matter what I think about Hunter Biden, he had a crack cocaine problem. He admitted that. He's trying to recover. I don't know if he is in recovery or not. I mean, it's
Hopefully.
rough. It's rough. Marjorie Taylor Greene showing those pictures on the floor of the house or whatever is totally unconscionable. It's like, why? What is this? What, like, you should be showing like bank records or something to be like, yeah, there's money here, it got to here, we don't know how, but like to show nude photos, even if they're redacted, it's like, what is that?
Because it's about smearing the character and attacking the personage of your opponents in our country anymore.
Yeah,
it's really sad. There is no civility, and anytime you bring that up with anyone, everyone's like, well, the other side does it. Like, I don't give a shit if the other side does it.
Yeah. Well,
shouldn't.
When did the other side? Did Democrats show nude photos of a Republican?
Well, not that I'm aware of, but the argument is the other side's done it, and the other side will do it, right? Like, and more so for me personally, when I'm saying that, I'm saying like everyone just attacks the personage and the character of the individual. They don't care about the policies and the ideas and the legislative work that they're doing, because let's be honest, Americans don't care. We're TikTokers at this point in our life, right? Like, if it's not a 3-second soundbite, a 5-second soundbite, I'm not going to pay attention to it.
I'm not a TikToker. I'm too old. I went to log on, and it said verify your age, and I said I was 43, and then it just sent me to CNN. So I was like, oh, I'm on CNN now. I don't need to be on TikTok. I don't need to do this. I'm too old.
I mean, that's not my point. My point is that we've become so driven by the short-term dopamine hit. We can't do in-depth journalism. The NPR article on election workers being threatened that talked about what was going on in Coos County, Oregon, like, that's a 20-minute long read.
Yeah.
People don't read those. Not enough.
Yeah.
Not enough.
I will say the one thing that's helped me, like on my drive to works, is the Apple News Plus has like the audio feature, so you can just click and listen to the story. Like, and I've done that during the day, like when I've been working. So, you're still getting the news, but you don't have to sit down and read whatever. And it's not that I hate reading. It's just like, if you're driving, it's kind of unsafe to try to read an article while you're driving. But I'll say this, like that bothers me too, about like, hey, we've all said stupid things about smearing whatever, and maybe I shouldn't have said this, but like to show nude photos of him probably on drugs.
It's also Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Like, are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. I'm just saying, where's the outrage with the nude? Oh, okay, well.
There is outrage. It's just all on the left.
Yeah. I think that's weird. I think people on the right should be like, hey, should we really do this? Like, maybe we shouldn't show the nude photos.
There's no forethought, right? It's all about right now. It's all about what can get me the sound bites, what can make us look like we're fighting back, what can make us look like we're not accepting being the villain, right? Like, the whole narrative in the Republican Party at the moment, and I shouldn't say it's not the whole Republican Party, because there are Republicans that aren't following it, and there is conservative media that's not following it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
the
wedge.
Broad narrative is we're being attacked for simply being Republican, and that's just simply not true. Republicans are being attacked because they're backing someone that there's a lot of smoke, like an egregious amount of smoke.
Yeah.
There's probably a fire.
I did hear
many people are turning on him that have worked for him, right? This guy's supposed to be the most amazing businessman since the history of business, and he's the greatest and hugest success ever, and yet everyone he'd hired has turned on him. His own attorneys. How many attorneys has this man gone through in the last couple of years? Like,
Chris Christie, too, on the campaign.
Dig into it.
Yeah, Chris Christie on the campaign trail going, what are we doing, guys? Like, what is happening? And you're like, yeah, finally somebody is like,
I just went through a podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill.
Oh yeah,
I
you
went through
mentioned
like
it
the
last
core
time.
part. There's a whole bunch more to it, but I went through the core part of it. And what it is, it's about Mars Hill Church in Seattle. And the pastor was very charismatic. The church grew very quickly. It was a mega church in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And 15,000 attendees or members at their peak,
That's quite a
15
bit.
different churches.
That is quite a bit.
Now, not all in Seattle. Like they had some in Portland, they had one in Albuquerque, Spokane, but most of them were in the Puget Sound region, which is like at the time the most unchurched city in the country was Seattle,
Oh, I
and
didn't know
it
that.
grew to be that big. But come to find out, there's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of other things going on in the church that weren't really acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people weren't being treated very well. It turns out the pastor was extremely totalitarian, and people were getting fired for like even remotely questioning him. Sound familiar?
Yeah. Yeah.
And throughout the whole thing, the guy who produced the podcast works for a publication called Christianity Today. And the guy who produced the podcast asked the same question, like, how did we let this happen?
Yeah.
And he was surrounded by good men that continued to ignore his failings, his abuses, his aggression, because the fruit, this in this case being people coming to Christ, was there. There was people coming to the Lord, people finding Jesus, and so we'll let him be rough around the edges as long as this keeps going until they finally figured out, like, and it took a long time for it to get out how bad it was.
Well, I mean that's exactly what's happening. Of like, well, we're winning elections. Well, they did in 2016, right?
Yeah.
But I think now it's swinging the other way. Like the midterms, there wasn't the big red wave. We talked about that on the thing.
At this point, you tie your name to Trump, you're going to lose. Now, it's not entirely true. If you live in a place that's generally conservative, you're going to win, and Trump's going to count that as a win. But no, like if you want to say you're a winner, you got to win in places where it's challenged.
It sounds like you have to be Trump too. It sounds like he's the only one that can do what he does.
Right.
So I was going to say, I mean, we're getting not to the end, but close to the end. Do you think there will be more? I mean, obviously, there's probably going to be. Well, I mean, not obviously. There may be more phone calls like this. Do you think after January 6th that there will be more violence if there is actually like a guilty verdict in one of these trials with Trump? Do you? Because I know I heard there was.
I expect it.
Yeah, I heard there was a little bit like, hey, they're kind of onto us, the cops, so don't show up to these events. But you never know, again, to go down into the wedge and the wedge, like the ardent supporters are the ones going, regardless, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go. Because I think that'll be maybe the point where it's like.
Well, we've already seen that when Trump asks people to back off, they don't.
Yeah.
Because they feel like he's being manipulated or pushed. And sadly, I think people will stand up for it. I think the rhetoric is there. I think there's an undercurrent of people that believe the country is falling apart and that there's going to have to be a civil war to bring it back. And I don't know how big that is. I don't think it's a very large number, but it's a big enough number that it's scary. And it saddens me, right? I am not optimistic about the future direction of our country. We are too divided. We cannot work together. We hate each other too much.
It was Marjorie Taylor Greene, but she brought up the national divorce. I will say though that maybe we should do an episode on defeatism because I don't know. Like I said, it's like you just spiral into a hopeless whatever. And I mean, I think some things in the government still do work, and I think we have to like think of those as opposed to like it's all.
And I think a lot of things in the government still work, and I think government. Government is necessary. I am not an anarchist on purpose. I'm just a small government conservative. Mm-hmm. I have little hope for the mob on the left and the mob on the right coming to reason. And this movement in our country to completely dismiss anything from the others, from them, is frightening, because I have witnessed it in my own conservative friends and in my own liberal friends, where they cannot admit when the other side is right about something. They are incapable of it. Right. And that's scary. Because if you can't see good in the other side at all, then why do you come to the table and negotiate at all? And where's the hope in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we should do something on defeatism, because my thing is like, and I probably will talk about, I've been listening to conservative stuff, and it like I said, there does, but the thing with Trump, it does seem to there be this, I don't know, kind of like, maybe people are kind of tired. You hear some people in the conservative things trying to back DeSantis or someone else, because they're just kind of tired of like, oh, another indictment. The joke I heard was from an actual reporter who covers Fox News and does sound bites and stuff. And after the Georgia indictment came in, he said, that's a lot of witch hunts. Like it's keeps happening.
I don't care if it's a witch hunt if you actually find a witch, right?
Yeah.
And right, the whole idea of the word witch hunt is that there isn't one. So what do you call it if there actually is someone at the end of it? Is it no longer a witch hunt because you found a fictitious creature?
I think convicted is the word used. Like if you find they're convicted of whatever. I mean, I don't know.
But the thing is like, I actually kind of appreciate that there's a lot of leaks coming out of Jack Smith's office, because those leaks are showing like, no, we have a strong case. We have real evidence. Like, we aren't just throwing this together. Like, Fani Willis spent 2 years putting together the case in Georgia. Like, every single I has to be dotted, T has to be crossed. Like, it has to be completely rock solid for them to go forward. And so every single thing that they have needs to be irrefutable. It cannot be questioned. It has to be rock solid, and it needs to be public.
Yeah.
So that only the most ardent supporters can support him. So that Republican leaders can come out and be like, oh man, like we were had. They need to be given space to save face, right? Like this is Japan in World War II. Like the emperor had to be given space to save face and had to be protected. It's the same thing here, right? The Republican Party as a whole, the leaders as a whole need to be able to bow out and be like, oh man, I had no idea.
I think that's kind of happening on that campaign trail. Like Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever it's running, he was saying like, I think Trump did good, like you just said, but I want to continue what he did and do better. And so he's kind of critiquing him that like, hey, he didn't really fulfill his promises, but like I'm going to continue doing this stuff. And so it's like,
I just want to see some of the candidates actually stand up, besides Christie and maybe Nikki Haley a little bit. But I want to see them collectively, individually come out and be like, he can't win.
Right.
He can't win. I don't care if you like him or not. Here's the reality. He will not beat Joe Biden. The polling proves it. Independents won't vote for him. No matter how much you dislike Joe Biden, no matter, I saw an article yesterday that I read, and it was talking about polling that had come out that basically showed that Joe Biden's approval rating is really low, but Donald Trump's is even lower. And so basically, this is going to be a lesser of two evils election again, and people are going to vote for Biden again the same way they did last time, because he's not Donald Trump, and they can't have Trump win. And so the Wall Street Journal article I read basically said that after the first debate, like anyone that's in single digits needs to bow out so that we can get a candidate forward who's actually going to be competitive against Trump,
right,
and can get the nomination so that we can have a Republican candidate that is capable of running on policy.
Aren't the first debates in like a week or like 10? Aren't they the end of August, I think? Like in a week? Yeah. Oh, they're next week. Oh, yeah. That'll be interesting.
So, right, like it's just, I mean, you're witnessing it here in me, right? Grief of politics. I'm really aggrieved at the state of politics in our country.
I know. Last night I was talking to you. I was like, oh man. I mean, it has to be rough. Like you've talked about all your positions. You thought the vaccines were safe. You took a vaccine. You thought the election was not stolen. In fact, we just brought that up. Like, hey, there were so many court cases, he didn't prove it. Like, what's going on with Trump? Please, like, he's so narcissistic, and so it's got to be really strange. Like, well, not strange, but disconcerting to be in your group of friends. Like, guys, what is happening? What is going on?
If we can't hold the people that we look up to accountable, like if we can't be open to that, if we're so sold out on that person as perfect and infallible, then
yeah, what's the point?
You have no ground in my eyes, and I hate to say it, but like people can come back and they can see the evidence. I'm not going to give up on anyone who's so sold on Donald Trump that they can't see his failings right now, because maybe they can in the future, but it's I don't know. It's just really sad. We've degraded to middle schoolers. Well, he did it,
Yeah.
and that's literally all of politics in our country right now.
I do think I've heard some interviews with like, I mean, not mostly conservatives, mostly just like a newer class of politicians that they're like, listen, like, I'm really trying to help people in my constituency deal with X, Y, and Z. So we can talk about if I'm not, I'm not wearing the right suit or I'm not whatever, but like, how is this going to impact people in my district? And the more I hear about that, I'm like, that's more important than, the pics of Hunter Biden on the floor or, it's like, that's
There's so many other things that you could go to. Like, why did you go to that? Why? Because it's sensational and it gets headlines.
oh yeah, and it worked because I was like, what? She's showing what? And I had to like
And
look
yet,
at
at the end of the day, what's actually finally moving it forward is there's actual evidence of actual corruption and of Hunter Biden trying to sell his father's influence while he was in the White House. And here's the reality of it. Here's the scary part for liberals. If they are able to prove that Hunter Biden was selling Joe Biden's influence in the White House, there's a very high likelihood that they're also able to tie that to Barack Obama.
they could, yeah. I mean, sure. My thing is like, go at fine. I don't care. Like a lot of liberals are like, do it. Go at like we, if you're gonna do this, do it. Do it.
I don't think a lot of liberals are. I think a minority of liberals are. I think. I don't know. That's my own opinion, and I'm glad it's moving forward. But it's only moving forward because whatever the special agreement that they had fell through. If that hadn't fallen through, we'd probably never see anything.
Well, I think didn't Merrick Garland say that I gave what's his name, Andrew Weissman, I gave him the power to do this. So if he wanted a special counsel, he could. He came to me and said, I want one, so I'm giving him that. Like, we already agreed that this was what was going to happen. So, I don't know, man. It's one of those things where I'm kind of scared for what's going to happen with these trials. I mean, they've set up barricades around these different locations. I hope nobody gets hurt. But, I mean, we've already seen evidence of people being hurt. And not only the phone calls, but like January 6th, we've already seen this. So there's already a precedent of this happening. So I'm
if you believe it is a witch hunt, and you distrust our judicial system to move it forward, I understand why people are going to be out there protesting, and I understand why they're going to be violent because they've lost trust in the government. What's going to happen? I am optimistic. I think the number of people that feel that way is actually pretty small. It's a large number, a very small percentage. But how we respond to it is going to be really important. And I don't know that we will respond well. I think we will respond in the way we always do. You guys are morons!
Well, I think, too, even...
I'm going to fight you because you attacked me!
I think even on the right, though, the problem is, well, with the, the wedge of his supporters, that even if he's found guilty, they're going to say it's a sham, that, like you said, the courts don't work. And so it doesn't really matter, except for, I think, a general electorate that'll be like...
And if that happens, he will lose more support. If the evidence is open and public, his base that is committed to him currently, that thinks it's a witch hunt, that number will erode when the evidence comes out. Because most people on an individual level, not in the mob setting, but on an individual level, most people are pretty reasonable. You present the evidence in a way that the evidence is compelling, they will listen to it.
Yeah.
But not all of them. So there's a large enough cohort of people that are bought into the lie, and to accept that it was a lie means they have to accept that they were misled. They won't do it.
I think, yeah, I was actually thinking about this of there's the buy-in right now is like you don't want to be wrong, so you double down of like, I can't admit that I back Trump or whatever.
And if you're a Republican in a conservative state at this point in time, you cannot question Trump.
Yeah. Yeah,
And so people are like, Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, and these people are backing him, and here's their outrage about the indictments. And I'm on the other end of it. Like, they have to. Yeah. If they want to stay in power, they have to. They can't question it.
And plus, I think with other issues we've talked about, which I won't bring up because that'd be a whole nother episode, but like, I think that with the other issues that have been brought up around just everything, that they know, or those conservatives think like Lindsey Graham, he can't win in a general electorate without that base of Trump's base kicking in. So he has to say, this is a total free speech issue. They're going after the president again. Like, and I think, yeah, it's like, I am actually, like, not scared for my life because I don't live in one of these places of trials going on, but I feel for these people that are going to be going through this stuff. Again, of, you know, they're going to have barricades set up, and apparently the Georgia one is going to be televised. So that's a new thing. So yeah, I mean, but that'll be a thing too of, you know.
And I hate it to be a public trial because part of that is sort of leans into the witch hunt narrative, right? Mm-hmm. But it needs to be. It needs to be irrefutable to the point where conservative news media can come out and be like, oh man, this is really bad looking. Well, and then the others can come, like the actual party members can come in and be like, oh wow, we need to hang this guy out to dry because we don't want to be tied to him.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's innocent until he's proven guilty, but now they have a chance to do this defense, and a lot of people have said, okay, well, now's your shot. If you think this was a sham, please do it. Now's your chance. So if they get up there and offer a compelling defense, it may work, but if they get up there and just say, oh, this is a thing about free speech, you know, or whatever, like every conservative has said, you're like, but like he talked about that in the second, anyway. Before we go on for another hour, Avin, is there anything you want to plug before we go?
You know, for usual, your agent guide. I'm a realtor that tries to not do the traditional realtor thing. I'm not trying to convince you to use me as an agent. I want to help you find the right agent for you, the right realtor for you, to help you find your home or sell your home, whatever works best. There's a lot of mediocre and subpar agents out there. There's tens and tens of thousands of real estate agents. Not all of them can be great, and I want to help people find the great ones in their area. So your agent guide, youragentguide.com. You can also look at my educational videos I've done on YouTube. Most of them are about a year old at this point, but a lot of it is evergreen information. It will always apply, and that's just Your Agent Guide on YouTube.
Yeah. As for me, again, my other podcast, Game with Grief, Avin's been on there a couple of times. I also want to remind people about this show, The Grief of Politics. If you want to write to us, you can write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Tell us what episode you're writing about, or if you have a comment or a question. And like, subscribe on all the podcast apps. We're even on Spotify, and the video for this will go up on the 20th, the evening of the 20th. So if you want to watch the video version, or you can do it on YouTube at 7 a.m. on the 20th when these hit.
You know what? I'll add to that too, right? Like and subscribe. Those are great things. Keep listening to the show. We appreciate it. But I mean, if you really like what we're doing, share it. If you appreciate it, share it with other friends you think might appreciate it. That's the best way to help and support us and what we're doing here. We're going to keep doing it because we do this multiple times a week anyway. You get to watch us actually talk about it in a more structured format than our usual hour and a half, 2 hour long phone calls about this stuff.
Now my wife is at the point where I get off the phone with you. She goes, that was Avin, wasn't it? Because we just talked about politics for like 90 minutes. It's like, yeah. Plus, we did do an episode in person last month, and we want to continue to do that. We're trying to come up with a schedule. I, of course, was supposed to be out of town. I was supposed to go to Hawaii, but they had terrible wildfires, so all that got canceled. We wish the people of Maui the best. I know there's a lot of relief efforts going down right now, and so I don't know of anybody to donate to. I was going to donate some money, but there's so many organizations. I want to find the right one to give money to, because there's good charities and bad charities out there. Let's be honest. But right. I think that's it this month. Next month, I think we'll just keep it as a surprise, because I don't really know what we're going to talk about.
A lot of news going on.
Right.
There could be some really big things to talk about.
There could be, anyway, we'll get into that. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining me again, Avin. I'm glad we got to make this work. It's kind of like under the wire, but we got it to work. And we didn't do anything offensive, so it'll be pretty easy to edit, and I'll be able to have it up here pretty shortly. But everybody have a good month, and we'll talk to you guys again next month.